Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to take all those complex global and national events making headlines and distill them into high-yield, structured takeaways, specifically geared for your civil services prep. Look, if you're tackling the UPSC, you already know the news isn't just some random list of events, right? It is a tightly woven web of interconnected policies. And my goal today? To help you see those connections crystal clear. Let's get right into it. So let's kick things off with a massive macro-level question, one that perfectly connects our external posture to our internal realities. How exactly do global conflicts and international tech regulations end up reshaping India's own domestic policies? I know, it sounds like a totally overwhelming question, but honestly, the answers are hiding right in plain sight. To figure this out, we're mapping our analysis directly to your syllabus. We'll cover 5 key areas today, starting with international relations and security, moving into polity, then economy and energy, ecology, and finally, zooming all the way down into grassroots social issues and health data. All right, Section 1, International Relations and Security. Let's look at General Studies Paper 2, specifically our immediate neighborhood and strategic partnerships. Let's contrast 2 vastly different geopolitical strategies playing out right next door. Right now, Pakistan is maneuvering through a bit of a geopolitical sweet spot, expertly leveraging ties with the US, China, and its Gulf partners. Meanwhile, India's approach to border and security provocations, it's all about firm, institutional resilience. A really prime example here is New Delhi's recent move to place the historic 1960 Indus Water Treaty into abeyance. Guys, this is a massive shift. It clearly signals that those traditional concessions we used to see, they are officially paused when national security is on the line. You can also see this strategic shift when you look at how our relationship with Japan has evolved. Think about it. It started out with that traditional official development assistance, or ODA, mostly focused on infrastructure. Then it naturally matured into a shared strategic alignment for a free and open Indo-Pacific. But today, it is completely transformed into a cutting-edge economic security alliance. We're talking AI, semiconductors, and bulletproof supply chains. It is no longer just about financial aid anymore, it's quite literally about mutual industrial survival. Moving on to Section 2, Polity, focusing on rights versus regulation. We're going to examine this growing tension between state administration and individual constitutional rights. So here is the crucial sticking point. How does the government's very genuine need to trace fraudsters clash with your constitutional privacy rights? Well, take WhatsApp. They recently tried to roll out a usernames feature to hide phone numbers and boost privacy, but the government stepped in and asked them to hit pause. Why? Well, because while hiding numbers totally protects users from each other, law enforcement desperately needs traceability to investigate this massive surge in cybercrimes, things like digital arrests and phishing scams. It is a textbook modern governance dilemma. How do you secure the state while simultaneously securing the privacy of over 850 million Indian users? And you know what? This tension between administration and rights completely bleeds into the physical realm of citizenship too. Just look at this. It perfectly captures the absolute mountain of paperwork that keeps our democracy running. So the Election Commission recently did this special intensive revision of electoral rolls, which led to millions of names being updated or just outright deleted. And man, this administrative exercise has sparked some very real anxiety. We're seeing citizens having their passport renewals or other fundamental rights delayed, all just because their name accidentally dropped off a voting list. Thankfully, the Supreme Court has drawn a very hard line here to protect fundamental rights. They clearly ruled that yes, the Election Commission determines your eligibility for the electoral roll, but, and this is a huge but, that administrative act alone absolutely cannot strip away your fundamental personhood or your citizenship. Actually, to put it simply, your constitutional rights don't just magically extinguish because of some bureaucratic typo in a voter database. This strict separation between administrative paperwork and constitutional rights, it's a vital, high-yield concept you've got to nail down for your polity prep. All right, shifting gears to Section 3, Economy and Energy Resilience. Let's look at General Studies Paper 3 and see how geopolitical shocks threaten our macroeconomic stability. 88%. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a staggering number. India imports nearly 90% of its crude oil requirements. And to make things even more precarious, a massive chunk of this, along with like 65% of our LNG supplies, flows straight through the highly volatile Strait of Hormuz in West Asia. Literally any conflict there is a direct, immediate threat to our economic lifeline. Yet, somehow, despite all these massive external shocks, India hasn't faced the crippling inflation or fuel shortages we've seen wrecking other countries. So how do we pull that off? Basically, through a highly coordinated, whole-of-government response. We're talking rapid supply chain diversification and really smart inventory management. But the real game changer, that's been the massive expansion of our city gas distribution network. We've gone from just 55 geographical areas back in 2014 to over 300 today. This essentially lets the government push piped natural gas and build a buffer to shield our economy from wild international oil volatility. And as we're busy building up this economic resilience, we also have to adapt our entire trade strategy to these new, undeniable climate realities. Have you heard of the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM? Basically, it means that Indian exports heading to the EU are now going to have to pay a carbon price equivalent. This is a massive curveball for our trade strategy. It effectively means domestic decarbonization isn't just some nice-to-have ecological goal anymore. It is now a strict, hard-line economic requirement if we want to stay globally competitive. Which perfectly segues into Section 4, Ecology and Environment. This is where our biggest conservation successes are suddenly meeting some brand new vulnerabilities. We are currently facing this really fascinating paradox. On one hand, we've had this incredible textbook success breeding Asiatic lions in Gujarat, but as the Supreme Court rightly pointed out, these lions are a national heritage, not just state property. Confining an entire thriving species to one single geographical landscape, it creates a massive, terrifying ecological fragility. Seriously, a single disease outbreak could literally wipe them all out. So the paradigm shift we need right now is moving from mere conservation success to true conservation security. And we do that by establishing a second home for them. Okay, shifting our focus from the forests out to the oceans, we need to challenge the standard everyday narrative about our declining marine resources. Think about it. If I asked you what the absolute biggest threat to our fisheries is, you'd probably instinctively say overfishing, right? But is that actually the real crisis? Take a look at this. The daily, harsh reality for our traditional small-scale fishers is that their coastal nets are coming up increasingly empty. And this is actively forcing them further and further out into really dangerous deep-sea zones just to scrape together a living. So here is the real kicker. The true threat isn't just taking too many fish out of the water. As the data clearly shows, it's the absolute systematic destruction of the inshore benthic environment. You know, that super delicate seafloor ecosystem, by these heavy, entirely unregulated mechanized trawlers. You combine that kind of physical destruction with a severe lack of coastal state patrolling staff, and what do you get? A full-blown governance crisis. One that's actively destroying the ecosystem while economically displacing our most vulnerable small-scale fishers. Finally, let's move to Section 5, Social Issues and Health Data. We're going to ground this explainer in some vital social data from the latest National Family Health Survey. This hits right at the core of your General Studies Papers 1 and 2. And wow, does this data reveal a worrying paradox in our public health infrastructure. On the surface, things look great. We vastly improved hospital deliveries, hitting an incredibly impressive 90.6%. Digital empowerment and bank account access for women are also way up. But then you look at the rate of exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months, and it has seen a sharp, genuinely alarming decline, dropping from 63.7% down to 55.8%. So what's going on here? Why are key maternal health outcomes dropping while our institutional access is actually rising? Well, when you peel back the layers, the data paints a picture of intense economic pressure. Mothers working in the informal, unorganized sector, they simply cannot afford to stay home for 6 months without the vital safety net of formal paid maternity leave. Then you throw in the aggressive marketing of infant formula, plus rising C-section rates, which we know can delay initial lactation, and the whole picture comes together. It shows us that grassroots social health is fundamentally inextricably tied to economic and labor protections. We've definitely covered a massive amount of ground today. We've seen how global trade tariffs dictate local manufacturing, how digital privacy goes head-to-head with national security, and how even basic maternal health is tightly bound by economic frameworks. And that leaves us with one final, totally vital question to ponder for your exams. Can constitutional personhood and fundamental welfare actually survive when they become so hopelessly entangled with administrative paperwork and economic loopholes? Seriously, think about how you would structure an essay around that specific question. All right, thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, guys. Keep studying hard and always keep connecting those dots.